Hello everyone and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Today channel.
Taylor tries to protect Ridge while acting as a matchmaker for Nick and Brooke. After Nick Marone's recent visit to Brooke Logan, Taylor Hayes will probably see a great opportunity. Although Ridge Forrester denies being envious, it is clear that he believes Brooke should avoid Nick at all costs. Despite her apparent skepticism, Taylor will continue to hold out hope that Nick would be able to divert Brooke's attention and prevent her from following Ridge. In light of it, it appears like Taylor will encourage Brooke to return to Nick. As Taylor tries to entice Brooke to Nick and keep Ridge for herself, BNB fans can perceive her as a matchmaker. Taylor can portray this as Brooke's opportunity to move on with someone else who holds great significance for her. Taylor can imply that Nick entered Brooke's life at the ideal moment and remind her that Ridge has also moved on. Naturally, Brooke noticed Ridge's response when he interrupted her and Nick. Brooke has reason to believe that Ridge's jealousy could be a sign that he secretly wants her back. On Friday's episode, Brooke might also bring up that option to Taylor, which would start a new feud between them. In any event, according to BNB spoilers, Brooke and Taylor will ultimately argue about Ridge and Nick. Given that Brooke would interpret Ridge's protectiveness as an indication that he still wants her, it appears that Taylor's attempt to play Cupid will fail. In this case, Brooke is correct because we are certain that Ridge will be pursuing her once more before the end of July. In the interim, let's discuss Daphne Rose, who turned down Steffy Forrester's offer to return to Los Angeles. Will Daphne back down or alter her mind about returning to LA? Taylor Hayes sat in her elegantly minimalistic living room, staring pensively out the window as the sunset painted golden streaks across the Los Angeles skyline. Her thoughts weren't on the view, though. They were tangled in the chaotic web of emotions surrounding Brooke Logan, Nick Marone, and most of all, Ridge Forrester. Taylor had always known that Ridge carried residual feelings for Brooke, and no matter how many times he'd professed that he had moved on, Taylor could see that undercurrent of jealousy in his eyes when Brooke was mentioned. That flash of protectiveness when he spoke about her. That sharp tension in his jawline when he heard Nick's name. Taylor didn't want to believe that Ridge was still hung up on his past, but deep inside, the therapist in her recognized the signs. That was why, when Nick Marone unexpectedly visited Brooke Logan and stirred up feelings long thought dormant, Taylor saw not a threat, but an opportunity. Ridge didn't want Brooke to get close to Nick again, that much was clear. He'd claimed it was for her own good, that Nick was a destructive influence, that their relationship had been volatile and doomed. But Taylor wasn't buying it. She knew Ridge's protectiveness was laced with something deeper, something territorial. He still saw Brooke as his, despite all the changes, the heartbreaks, the cycles of reunion and betrayal. Taylor's goal had always been to build a future with Ridge free of Brooke's shadow. So now, she saw an opening. What if Brooke truly fell for Nick again? What if she was finally distracted long enough for Ridge to stop running to her every time there was a hiccup in his relationship with Taylor? That would change everything. So, armed with this plan, Taylor subtly inserted herself into Brooke's narrative. She showed up at Brooke's office uninvited, breezy and smiling, commenting casually on Nick's return. "He still has that same edge, doesn't he?" Taylor would say with a coy smirk. Brooke, surprised but intrigued, would respond cautiously, unsure of where Taylor was going with the conversation. And that's where Taylor would pounce, not aggressively, but with the gentle art of psychological suggestion. She would remind Brooke of all the good times she had with Nick, of how he made her laugh, how he grounded her, how they had once envisioned a future together far from the chaos of Ridge's indecision. Taylor would lean back in her chair and say, "Maybe Nick came back into your life for a reason, Brooke. Maybe the universe is giving you another shot at happiness, away from Ridge." Brooke, always a romantic at heart, would mull over those words, recalling the days she spent with Nick by the beach, his arms wrapped around her during long sunsets, his confidence calming her storm. But Brooke is no fool. She'd seen the fire in Ridge's eyes when he walked in on her and Nick together. The storm that passed through him didn't come from disinterest. It came from possessiveness. Passion. Love. Or maybe it was all three. Brooke might even bring this up to Taylor, cautiously, diplomatically. "You saw how Ridge reacted. Do you think maybe it means something?" Brooke would ask one day, over coffee, her eyes narrowing with cautious optimism. And Taylor, biting her tongue and forcing a patient smile, would gently deflect. I think Ridge cares about you. Of course he does. But he's moved on. We've both moved on. Haven't we? The question hung in the air like mist. Because the truth was, neither of them had moved on. Not really. Taylor still carried Ridge in her heart like a burning ember, constantly reigniting every time he smiled, every time he touched her hand, every time he whispered something about the life they could have together. And Brooke. Brooke lived for those moments when Ridge's stoicism slipped and he betrayed the passion he tried so hard to suppress. As Taylor continued her subtle manipulation, encouraging Brooke to explore her feelings for Nick, planting seeds of doubt about Ridge's intentions, she remained aware that her plan was walking a very thin line. It was one thing to steer Brooke away from Ridge, it was another to completely entangle herself in a triangle of false pretenses. Yet she pressed on, determined. Taylor even invited Nick out under the guise of a friendly catch-up, just to see where his head was. She'd ask casual questions, what brought him back to LA? Was he still carrying a torch for Brooke? And Nick, ever the enigmatic sailor, would grin and say something cryptic like, some women leave an anchor in your soul, no matter how far you drift. Taylor would sip her wine and nod thoughtfully, sensing the passion still lingering behind his words. Encouraged, she tried to orchestrate more interactions, accidental run-ins, shared events, and maybe even a charity gala where Brooke and Nick could reconnect. Ridge, meanwhile, noticed. He wasn't blind. He knew Taylor was pushing Brooke in Nick's direction, and it irritated him more than he expected. He'd confront Taylor in private, asking her point-blank what she was doing. Are you seriously trying to get Brooke and Nick back together? He'd demand. Taylor would defend her actions, of course. I just want Brooke to be happy. And I want you to stop feeling like you have to be her savior every time she stumbles. Ridge would scowl, not willing to admit that he was indeed torn between his loyalty to Taylor and the lingering pull he felt every time Brooke entered a room. Meanwhile, Brooke and Taylor's so-called friendship began to fray. During one particularly tense exchange, Brooke would accuse Taylor of manipulating the situation. You want me with Nick so you can have Ridge all to yourself, Brooke would say flatly, her voice filled with disappointment. Taylor, stunned but unrelenting, would respond, and you want Ridge because you can't stand the idea of him being happy with anyone else. Their fragile truce would shatter. From then on, their interactions would be icy, veiled in politeness but seething underneath. Brooke, despite everything, would find herself drawn more and more toward Ridge. The spark between them couldn't be ignored, not even with Nick in the picture. Nick, for his part, sensed the shift. One evening, after an emotionally charged dinner with Brooke, he'd finally say, "You're still in love with him, aren't you?" Brooke would falter, unable to meet his eyes. "I don't know," she'd whisper. But they both knew she did. Ridge's jealousy had awakened something in her, hope, longing, and the thrill of unfinished business. Taylor's plan, so carefully orchestrated, was unraveling before her eyes. Brooke wasn't falling back in love with Nick. If anything, Nick had only reminded her of how much Ridge still meant to her. And Ridge, conflicted, moody Ridge, was slowly letting his walls down again. As July approached, Ridge would make his move. A romantic overture. A grand gesture. A whispered confession that he never truly stopped loving Brooke. It would be everything she dreamed of, everything Taylor feared. And as the love triangle intensified once more, old wounds would reopen, and new betrayals would surface. Taylor, feeling betrayed by Ridge's emotional cheating, would retreat inward, questioning her decisions, wondering if she had played herself in this dangerous game. And amid all the heartbreak, another subplot quietly brewed. Daphne Rose, a mysterious woman with ties to Steffi Forrester's past, had been contacted by Steffi in a desperate attempt to get her back to Los Angeles. But Daphne, independent and guarded, had declined. Her reasons remained murky, something about unfinished business, or perhaps an unwillingness to be dragged into the Forrester drama. Yet Steffi was persistent. She knew Daphne held secrets. And maybe, just maybe, those secrets could change everything once they were brought into the light. As Ridge, Brooke, and Taylor danced their endless dance of love and loss, Daphne stood at the edge of this drama, one phone call away from tipping the balance of power in ways none of them could predict. For now, though, the focus remained on the central chaos. Taylor's matchmaking had failed. Brooke was more convinced than ever that Ridge still wanted her, and Ridge, for all his protests, was proving her right with every glance, every conflicted sigh, every romantic slip. As the summer heated up, so did the drama. And as every bold and the beautiful fan knows, no match is ever made without consequences, and no love triangle ever ends without a storm. Hayes in danger, Ridge and Nick's futures, and Taylor and Brooke's disagreement. Talk between Brooke Logan and Taylor Hayes. But when it comes to Nick Marone and Ridge Forrester, they will not agree. Let's discuss the upcoming developments in the CBS soap drama as you continue reading. Taylor's discovery on Thursday. Fans watched as Taylor challenged Ridge to share his thoughts throughout the evening. At last, he acknowledged that he discovered Brooke and Nick together. Taylor made an effort to advise the designer. However, it appeared as though Taylor was pressuring Ridge to acknowledge that he still harbors feelings for Brooke. Despite her frequent interrogations, the psychologist may argue that she is not insecure. Brooke Logan's struggle. Nick has presented her with an alluring offer over with Brooke. But according to Nick, she needs to put Ridge in the past. Fortunately, the sailor let her time to consider it. The blonde wants to be with Ridge since she knows that she still loves him a lot. However, Brooke must also find a way to move on if Ridge has already done so with Taylor. It's definitely not helping that Ridge and I work at Forrester Creations every day. Competitors are at odds. According to spoilers for tomorrow's episode of The Bold and the Beautiful, Taylor and Brooke finally meet. Taylor is correct, but Ridge despises Nick and wants him to avoid Brooke. Ridge no longer has the authority to dictate to the blonde, who is now an adult. Taylor will want to maintain her connection with Ridge. At the same time, Ridge's jealousy of Nick consumes his attention. That raises serious concerns for Taylor. The two women don't seem to agree on what should happen with Ridge and Nick. June 20th, 2025, Friday. A development with Hayes Forrester Finnegan may potentially occur in the interim. As Luna Nozawa approached the young kid and presented him with a gift, fans looked on in horror. After Luna didn't harm him, she was invited on the spur of the moment to teach the art class that Hayes is taking at the beach house. What will happen when Electra Forrester arrives to pick up the young boy? This will just allow Luna greater access to him. It was a crisp Los Angeles morning when Taylor Hayes, ever the composed and intellectual psychologist, found herself once again unraveling the emotional web that connected her to Ridge Forrester and, more problematically, Brooke Logan. Taylor, despite her years of training and countless hours of therapy administered to others, could not quite detach herself from the raw, complicated feelings that surfaced every time Ridge's name was mentioned, especially when it was in conjunction with Brooke's. The previous night had been particularly troubling for her, as she noticed Ridge staring off into space, distracted, removed, as if consumed by a memory that refused to be buried. She pressed gently, as any good therapist would, asking him what was bothering him, suggesting that he talk about the thing clearly eating away at his soul. Ridge, tired of deflecting and emotionally exhausted from years of emotional entanglements, finally admitted what Taylor feared most: he had seen Nick Marone and Brooke together, and the image haunted him. The sight of the man he despised the most with the woman he could never quite let go of had clearly triggered something deep and primal in Ridge, something unresolved and burning. Taylor listened, nodded, and offered her insights with professional ease, but inside, she was shaken. Was Ridge truly committed to her, or was she once again a placeholder, a soft place to land while his heart remained tethered to the whirlwind that was Brooke Logan? Her instincts told her that Ridge's anger toward Nick was less about betrayal and more about unresolved love, a theory that made her stomach twist. Even as Taylor tried to rationalize his behavior, to chalk it up to protective instincts or loyalty gone awry, she couldn't ignore the jealousy in his voice, the way he lingered on Brooke's name. And so, the seeds of discord began to sprout, fertilized by years of romantic rivalry and emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, Brooke Logan was facing a dilemma of her own, though it was wrapped in an offer that shimmered with possibility and freedom. Nick, the rugged sailor with a past as turbulent as the sea itself, had made it clear that he wanted her, truly, madly, fully, but only if she was willing to leave Ridge behind. The proposition should have been tempting. After all, Nick had always given Brooke a kind of steadiness and loyalty that Ridge never could. Yet, Brooke's heart remained tied to Ridge, that maddening, mercurial designer who had broken her heart more times than she could count. Still, the idea of moving on, of finally reclaiming her own narrative, beckoned. Could she do it? Could she shut the door on Ridge forever and finally embrace a future with Nick? That question gnawed at her as she prepared for another tense stay at Forrester Creations, where every hallway echoed with memories of her time with Ridge, every glance and every conversation a reminder of what was and what might never be again. The tension reached a breaking point when Taylor and Brooke found themselves alone in the Forrester family salon. Neither woman had planned the encounter, but fate, or perhaps the machinations of the universe, clearly had a script to play out. Taylor opened the conversation diplomatically, but her words carried the weight of accusation. Brooke, never one to back down, countered with her own truths. Ridge's obsession with Nick, Brooke argued, was not about concern for her well-being, but about possessiveness, about control. Taylor, ever composed but clearly on edge, maintained that Brooke was a destabilizing force in Ridge's life and that if Brooke truly cared for Ridge, she would leave him be. But Brooke, her eyes blazing, reminded Taylor that Ridge was not hers to claim, not a trophy to be defended. He had made promises to both of them, broken all of them, and now had no right to dictate her life, especially not her romantic future. The air between the women crackled with unresolved history. They were not just fighting over a man, they were battling decades of betrayal, heartbreak, and competition. Ridge, they both knew, was standing at a crossroads, one that required more than just choice, it required transformation. And yet, neither woman was convinced he was capable of that change. As their disagreement grew more intense, a new thread began to weave itself into the tapestry of drama: Hayes Forrester Finnegan. The sweet, innocent little boy who was the product of Steffi Forrester and John Finnegan's love had unknowingly found himself at the center of a potentially dangerous situation. Luna Nozawa, a young woman with a complicated past and an even murkier connection to the Forrester family, had begun to take a keen interest in Hayes. On the surface, it appeared harmless. She gave the boy a small, thoughtful gift and was later invited to help teach an art class at the beach house, a place where Hayes regularly spent time. But for those who were paying attention, especially those who knew Luna's family history, something didn't sit right. Why was Luna so interested in Hayes? Was it maternal instinct or something more calculating? Luna's presence in Hayes's life might have started innocently, but it was clear that her access was growing, and with it, the potential for danger. Everything came to a head when Electra Forrester, a newcomer with strong family ties and a reputation for getting what she wanted, arrived unannounced to pick up Hayes. Her presence was jarring, unexpected, and carried with it a sense of finality. Electra, with her polished exterior and razor-sharp instincts, immediately questioned Luna's role. She had been tasked with protecting Hayes while Steffi and Finn were traveling, and the moment she saw Luna with the child, red flags went up. There was tension, unspoken but palpable, as Electra questioned Luna's intentions, her qualifications, and her connection to the Forrester family. Luna, visibly uncomfortable, tried to explain, but the conversation was cut short when Hayes began to cry, startled by the adult's rising emotions. That moment shifted everything. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Ridge and Brooke, or even Taylor's insecurities, it was about the next generation, about protecting innocence in a world brimming with secrets, lies, and betrayals. Back at Forrester Creations, Ridge was spiraling. He'd been informed of Electra's concerns, and now his focus was divided between his romantic entanglements and the safety of his grandson. The once powerful designer, a man used to controlling every stitch and seam of his world, now found himself powerless. He knew Luna, at least tangentially, and though he didn't believe she would ever hurt Hayes intentionally, he also understood that even unintentional harm could have devastating consequences. Meanwhile, Taylor and Brooke's argument took a darker turn. Taylor, feeling increasingly sidelined, accused Brooke of manipulating Ridge through their shared history. Brooke, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak, called Taylor out for using psychology as a weapon, diagnosing everyone else's feelings while ignoring her own. You say you're not insecure, Brooke snapped, but every time Ridge looks my way, you spiral. Taylor, stunned, held back tears as she countered, and you say you love Ridge, but you entertain Nick every time he calls. Which one of us is really afraid to be alone? The accusation hit its mark, and for a brief moment, silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating, loaded with decades of grief and longing. And as if the emotional chaos weren't enough, news broke that Hayes had gone missing. One moment he was playing on the beach with his art supplies, the next, he was gone. Electra was frantic, Luna was beside herself, and Ridge, alongside Taylor, Brooke, and eventually Nick, raced to the scene. Suspicion immediately fell on Luna, but a security camera revealed something far more shocking, a shadowy figure, unrecognizable at first, but later identified as someone from Luna's past, had lured Hayes away. It wasn't a kidnapping in the traditional sense, it was a calculated, methodical act meant to hurt the Forresters by targeting their most vulnerable. The fallout was seismic. Ridge blamed Luna, Taylor blamed Ridge for not protecting their grandson, and Brooke blamed herself. After all, if Ridge hadn't been so focused on watching her every move with Nick, maybe he would have seen the signs. Nick, despite everything, stepped in to help find the boy, proving that despite his many flaws, his love for Brooke and concern for the Forrester family ran deep. The search for Hayes would bring allies and enemies together, force rivalries to pause in the name of something greater. And though the boy would eventually be found, safe, but shaken, the incident would leave scars that no one could ignore. In the aftermath, Taylor and Brooke would sit once more, their rivalry momentarily eclipsed by the fragility of life. "We can't keep doing this," Taylor would whisper. "Not if it means putting the children at risk." Brooke, weary and raw, would nod. "But we also can't pretend Ridge isn't part of this chaos. We both keep clinging to him like he's the solution, when he might be the problem." And in that rare moment of agreement, perhaps the seeds of healing would finally take root, even if the road ahead remained long, uncertain, and shadowed by the ghosts of their past.